local government, state government, working for, nonprofits and other organizations. Some folks are AICP certified and might just be in it for the half continuing maintenance credit that we're giving for this. Other folks might not be certified and might just be in it for the education.
So Ross gets half a credit for this? He's AICP.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Good stuff.
And it's statewide. So this is uphill, downhill, south side, north side.
Yeah, I know that.
But as far,
sorry. I was just gonna say that I know that a few folks shared it with people kind of to the western portion of the state. So hopefully we'll have a pretty decent focus there.
and I think as far as like special things to pay attention to, Josh, and yeah, that presentation looks good. Yeah, perfect.
And it's changing?
Yes.
Yep.
It's ending. There we go.
Well,
Yeah. As far as what I think the planners might be most interested in hearing about is the threshold plan. So if there's been any kind of development on how people are feeling about that, that would definitely be something I would guess people would want to focus on, particularly because they're the people who might be creating it. And then also a lot of the planners will some of the planners, especially those that are interested today, will likely be floodplain managers as well. So maybe.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you that, like, difference between a planner and a floodplain manager in this context. How's that work?
They could be the same. You know, a lot of floodplain managers are planners, they're environmental specialists, engineers, or building code officials. So it kind of, you know, it really runs the gamut. So I don't know. I mean, you could ask people to comment if they are.
Yeah.
But I have no idea.
I was thinking this morning, I'm going to try to coach a little more of like, I'd love to, like, I'm happy to answer as many questions as people have, but I want to try to encourage a little more just sort of feedback or thought too, if we can.
Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, I mentioned that to Gina. Yeah, Ross and Gina.
People can put in their affiliations, you know, at the start. We'll have everyone write out their titles. So I can kind of take a look at that while we're going through and seeing this here. But definitely, I think that's great.
So Gina, how do you get looped into this, like in your current, I get how this fit your old job. Are you just kind of like having fun right now, or like what's going on here?
Well, it relates to my old job, but it also relates to my professional development because I'm involved with the Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association. I'm on the board as the vice president of sections, and I'm also the co-director of the central section, which is the Richmond area. So I've got that hat on today.
Awesome. And unrelated, but I made work for you in another way by talking to Sue yesterday. You may know.
Oh, I heard. So I've been working on that too.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Get something today.
Gina makes the best charts, everybody.
Oh,
I believe that.
I try.
For Wetlands Watch, Gina, what document do you want to use?
Oh yeah, either one. I have them both open so that I could like see where people appeared, but
Yeah, I have no preference at all.
Does Gina have editing capability in the one that's in our shared drive? I had that issue with Kristen.
Yeah, I haven't put it in the
perfect.
reason. I was just gonna wait.
So
I just typed.
Yeah, let's use the one Gina's typing in. That's great.
I'm sorry. Are you through, Mary Carson? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Through, yes, no problem.
Can someone tell me the name of like the umbrella group I'm speaking to today? Again, the
It's
American Planning Association.
Yeah, it's the Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association.
And Gina, is there anyone I need to recognize from the Virginia chapter or anything?
I would just say Virginia chapter. I don't know who else from leadership is going to be on the call, so.
Got it. I'm good to go. Thanks. Hey, and again, thank you so much, Wetlands Watch. These are phenomenal and they just keep coming. We appreciate it so much.
Cool. Absolutely. So we've got 32 people in the waiting room now. Just briefly, so I guess we'll just do kind of a quick, should we just introduce the 5 or 6 of us and then do like the kind of housekeeping stuff and then pass it to Gina. We'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, and if people want to say hi and indicate who they are, where they're from, whatever, they can do that in the chat.
Yeah.
Get some idea of who's showing up.
Yeah, I think that's useful. And I'll make sure everyone's muted, but maybe later on we can kind of open it up if there's still time available.
And if whoever moderates can just remind people, knowing their affiliations is always helpful when they have comments and questions.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Well, should I start letting folks in?
Yeah.
Cool. Welcome all as folks start to filter in. People are still coming in, so we'll probably give it about 2 or 3 minutes just to see once the
But
waiting
you
room
can't
slows
give me a
down.
total that you can't either.
I'll mention this again, but also I'm just going to mute everyone.
I figured I'd let you guys be the faces and then I'll pop back. Is that cool?
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so for those of you who are just logging in now, we're just gonna give it a couple more minutes. I think we had about 105 people who had RSVP'd and we're at about 60 now. So just give folks a few more minutes to filter in here. And we'll give it one more minute. Things are starting to slow down a little bit. Yeah, so Skip just mentioned in the chat box, but for those of you who are already joined, if you could add in your name and affiliation into the chat box, that would be quite helpful for our records. Okay, I think we can probably get started now. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today to learn more about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. Thanks to APAVA for setting up this meeting, and especially to Deputy Sachs for taking the time to present today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. I know everyone's had 1,000 Zoom meetings today, so we'll keep it brief, but we'll keep everyone muted as you join. So after we've kind of introduced ourselves via the chat box, please put your questions in that chat box, and we'll make sure that we review it and go through everything on the call. If there's not a lot of questions coming in, or if we have some extra time at the end, or if it's just easier to kind of present your question audibly, then if you want to use the raise your hand function, we can do it that way, and I can unmute people individually. If you haven't used it before, it's on that more button at the bottom of the screen, the 3 dots. So yeah, outside of that, what else do we have? This meeting has been approved for half of a CM credit for those of you who are AICP certified. So once the chat slows down, I'll throw the CM credit number in there so everyone can make sure they have that. We can also follow up with it. But outside of that, so we'll do most of our introductions in the chat. But just for those of us who are from Wetlands Watch and Gina, I'm Ross Weaver. I'm the Program Assistant Director of Wetlands Watch and also a member of APVA. So I'm glad that we could kind of organize this meeting. But if Skip or MC wants to introduce themselves, we can do that pretty quickly.
I'll jump in. I'm Skip Stiles, Executive Director of Wetlands Watch. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for participating in this.
Mary Carson Stiff, Director of Policy at Wetlands Watch, and really glad to be a part of the conversation today.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, and I'm Madison Teeter, Program Associate of Wetlands Watch. Happy to be here today.
And Gina, I'm sure everyone knows you, but if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, it couldn't hurt.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gina DeChico. I currently professionally work for the Department of Conservation and Recreation as a land conservation specialist. I used to be a floodplain planner at DCR though, so the content of today's event is harkening back to my former position. And in addition to that, I am on the board of the Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association as the Vice President of Section.
Great, thank you. And then Deputy Sachs, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. Happy New Year. My name is Joshua Sachs, and I am the Deputy Secretary for Natural Resources. I work for Governor Northam and Secretary Strickler on a wide portfolio that includes certain parts of resilience, land conservation, flood insurance, a lot of that stuff. And I've been helping in the development of the flood fund that we're going to talk about today. So thanks for having me.
Okay, perfect. Well, with that being said, I think we can probably kick this thing off. Gina, if you want to take, I guess we can kind of hop right into Josh's presentation, but unless there's any other moderation to begin with at the start of this.
Yeah, I was just going to thank Wetlands Watch. Thank you all for organizing and running this event, as well as the other similar events that you've been hosting about the same topic. Want to mention real fast that The Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association is a professional organization for folks in the planning field. Among other things, it provides professional development opportunities, networking opportunities, and advocacy for planning in the state. And as Ross mentioned, this has been approved for half a CM credit. Additionally, if you enjoyed this webinar and you want to share it with folks afterwards, it will be available, I think, on the Wetlands Watch website, as well as on the APA-VA website. And through the end of the year, you can still get half a CM credit for watching it after the fact. I think the CM number changes though, if you watch it, if you watch the recording. So you'll have to check the website to see what that is before you log that. And other than that, yes, as as Ross mentioned, we'll be doing questions in the chat box primarily, and we'll be monitoring that. Additionally, just any other thoughts or comments that you want to share. You know, we definitely have time for Q&A at the end, but also just want to have a discussion. So if you've got, you know, ideas or thoughts about it, feel free to share those as you go. And also when you do, please type, in addition, you know, your name will pop up, but let us know what your work or your affiliation is so that we know sort of where you're coming from when you're asking your question or making your comment. And I think that's all I wanted to say real fast. And with that, I will turn it over to Deputy Secretary Sachs.
All right. Hi, everybody. Hi again, I should say. Before I kick this off and I make a short presentation and then have a conversation with y'all, I just want to do a couple thank yous and you know, welcomes as I begin. So first, like Gina, I want to thank Wetlands Watch. We are doing a lot of things to try to improve resilience in the Commonwealth. We're hoping to scale up really fast, push a lot of money out, and that requires a lot of work, and it requires a lot of outreach and a lot of feedback. And Wetlands Watch has graciously helped us do several of these sessions and reach out. So, you know, just there, thank you to Skip, Ross, Mary Carson, Madison, everyone who has helped us kind of put this together. We can't thank you enough. You've really helped us to try to advance this. I also want to recognize a couple people from the governor's team that are on the call. Admiral Ann Phillips, who is the governor's Special Assistant for Coastal Adaptation and Protection, is on and leads a large majority of the work here. She has been responsible for the framework, which I'm going to start with before I pivot into the flood fund. So Admiral Phillips is on, as well as Cherise Zhang from her team, and Miriam Karad from my office, who handles our outreach. Pardon me, I should say Assistant Secretary Miriam Karad is on, who handles our outreach. So this is a team effort, and I just wanted to make sure people were aware of some of the people who have been helping us to put all this together. So with that, I'm going to try to share my screen and walk you through a presentation. Gina, can you give me a thumbs up if you see my screen? Okay, good to go. All right. So as I said a moment ago, Virginia has been working really hard to catch up to improve our resilience across the Commonwealth. I don't need to tell you, you know, planners, people who actually are on the ground and are seeing changes happen or seeing development, that we are woefully behind when it comes to resilience. That's not a unique Virginia problem. That's a national or global problem, but certainly a significant challenge, and we need to scale up quickly. So what I'd like to do today is walk you through very quickly some of the things the Northam Administration has done to try to facilitate that ramp up. I'm going to end with a discussion of the Community Preparedness Flood Fund, which will be our primary driver, at least in the short term, of resilience funding in the Commonwealth. And then I'd like to have a conversation where I'm happy to answer any questions y'all might have, and really would love to hear any thoughts, feedback, or advice that you have, because most of what I'm going to tell you about today is in its fledgling or development stages, and we want to get it right, and that means we want to hear from you. That's a sincere request. So with that, away we go. Nope. Here we go. Okay. I think I might have gone too slow. Yep, there we go. So earlier last year now, Happy New Year. Last year, Governor Northam announced what we call a coastal master planning framework. Let's start there. But one with the right-of-way acknowledgement that the goal of this call today is to talk about resilience statewide. And I understand there are planners, people on this call from across the state, but obviously we have significant needs in the coastal zone, and that's where we started. And we created a master planning framework. And that framework is intended to ultimately get us to, a traditional coastal resilience master plan akin to what you've seen in states like Texas and Louisiana, where they have a tiered prioritized project list divided by region. And that is how we will operate in the coastal zone. We begun there, and these principles are going to extrapolate out, but I think they hold true whether you're in the coastal zone or not. So let's start there. In our coastal master planning framework, we believe that there are 5 principles that are absolutely imperative for the Commonwealth to put forward. And here they are. 1, acknowledge climate change. Might sound easy, hasn't been easy for a long time. I'm sure there are many of you on this call who have had lots of conversations about recurrent flooding. Governor Northam thinks we ought to call it what it is, and that's climate-driven flooding. There it is. 2, enhance equity. We know that some communities are better equipped to deal with this than others. We want to make sure no community is left behind. We want to make sure everyone is helped how they ought to be. So that's an important concept for us throughout. 3, we deeply believe that in many cases, nature is the best flood control money can buy. It's already there, it's free, it provides additional ancillary benefits. For me, wildlife benefits, water quality benefits, other things. So whenever we can, we want to use nature-based approaches. Will there be situations where we have to build a flood wall, or tide gates or something? Of course. But when we can, we want to use nature-based. 4th, we want to use community-wide approaches, region approaches. We want to plan at the regional scale. I don't have to tell all of you, this is an easy call for me, that if I put a home up on stilts, I still have a whole bunch of problems. I have to deal with the roadway. I have to deal with the utilities. So when we can protect communities at the community scale, at the water line, and protect the road and the home and everything else behind it, that's ideal, and we want to do that. And last but not least, we have to be pragmatic. If you try to do the 4 things I already mentioned, that will cost a lot of money, and likely more money than we have. So we need to do our best to find cost-effective ways of implementing these programs. Again, these are principles for our coastal framework, but they hold true as we expand out and do work in the non-coastal zone as well, and that's why we're starting here. So once we've established those sort of overarching goals or principles, then we have kind of more scaled down primary goals for the master planning. And that is 1, to identify and prioritize projects. We want this to be about actual projects, not more commissions and meetings and charrettes and groups. We need to build stuff, and that's the #1 goal for our work going forward. 2 is to find financing strategies that will be long lasting, will continue, and will allow us to achieve the goals we need. And that's going to take some work. I'm going to speak to that later on. 3, I mentioned before, trusting the science, believing in climate change, and addressing it is important. And we've kind of furthered that concept into a goal, as you can see, #3. And 4th is coordination. None of these things work well when everyone goes it alone. We push water at one another. We create an array of problems. When we are coordinated, we can leverage dollars, we can do the best work, and that's our goal. So, as I mentioned before, again, in this master plan, we will then divide the state into 4 regions. You can see them there. And then we're going to take some immediate actions to start to implement that. First, Governor Northam has created a technical advisory committee to help develop the coastal master plan. Admiral Phillips and Secretary Strickler are chairing that technical advisory committee. They had their first meeting I believe the next one is coming in January, but I'm not 100% on that. Second, Governor Northam elevated the Coastal Zone Management Program at the Department of Environmental Quality to report directly to the Secretary and Admiral Phillips to help us implement and administer the master plan and the flood fund. And last but not least, community engagement's important. That's why we're doing events like today, because we need both your advice and your buy-in. So with that, now that I've told you a little bit about the framework, I want to pivot and I want to talk about sort of the main topic for today's call, and that's the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. Again, I wanted you to hear a little bit about the framework because we're going to take those principles and embed them here, but this is the flood fund. So some of you may know, some of you may not, that a couple things are happening. First, this month, Virginia will formally join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, known as RGGI, and will be the first southern state to cap carbon pollution from fossil fuel power plants. And in doing so, companies will have to buy pollution credits, so to speak, on a market, and revenues generated from those sales will capitalize a fund called the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. 45% of the revenues from that fund, according to the bill passed by the General Assembly, will go into that. We estimate RGGI will bring in the neighborhood of $100 million a year. That's a low estimate, but we're anticipating that this fund will be capitalized somewhere in the neighborhood of $50+ million annually. In the General Assembly, when they set up this fund, they gave us a couple parameters, and you can see them listed here. So one, we have to use this money for flood protection and coastal resilience. That should be the first use, or pardon me, the first objective of any funds. So yeah, there are going to be instances where a project is going to give us stormwater and water quality and flooding benefits and a whole array of others. Flooding needs to be first and foremost for these funds to be used. Second, you heard me talk before about community scale and nature-based mitigation. And we're going to prioritize funding those types of projects when we can. Third, the General Assembly said that no less than 25% of the funds should be used for low-income communities to help them. And the code sets a metric for what a low-income community is. That's not set by us. You'll note that we've said that we will spend or hold over money, because if we don't have enough good projects in that year, we're going to hold the money and make sure it still goes to the communities that need it. And last but not least, we say, or the General Assembly told us, that localities shall use monies from the fund primarily for the purpose of flood prevention in areas of recurrent flooding. So again, our work to identify high flooding areas and target them is something that the General Assembly has specifically told us to do. From those directions of the General Assembly, we came up with the following program goal. The Virginia Community Flood Preparedness Fund will provide support for regions of localities across Virginia to reduce the impacts of flooding, including flooding driven by climate change. The fund will prioritize projects that are in concert with local, state, and federal floodplain management standards, local resilience plans, and the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan. The fund will empower communities to complete vulnerability assessments and develop and implement action-oriented approaches to bolster flood preparedness and resilience. So the question people usually ask first is, well, can I have some money and what can I use it for? Well, here is at least what we are intending right now that you might use it for. And we put this into 3 buckets, and I'd like to talk through each one. Planning comes first. And again, I think that on a webinar with planners, that's probably going to make a lot of sense to all of you. Let me say a few specific things. You've heard me throughout this call talk about how we want things to work in concert. We want things to be coordinated. We want things at a certain scale. Obviously, without planning, we can't do that. And to ensure that that planning is happening, our intention is that a sort of ticket to entry to get money from the Community Flood Preparedness Fund would be that a locality has developed some type of resilience plan, a locality-wide resilience plan. And to start with that, we recognize that some communities are going to have that already. You know, if you're Virginia Beach and you've been at it for 10 years, I get it. Some communities simply do not have that money yet, or pardon me, do not have those resources, and we want to make it available. So if a community needs a planning grant, that is the first thing we'd like to do with this fund. You can see a planning grant could be to create community-wide plan. It can also be for all these very specific things that might be needed as one develops a plan or implements a plan. So education, outreach, technical staff training, updated estimates, etc. The second category is studies and data collection. It kind of pings off the first one, but there are some things that we will need to know before we can make a good plan. You might need a better assessment on the rainfall data in your area. You might need updated stream gauge networks. You know, we want to make those things happen. So that's a category. And then last, but certainly not least, last but maybe first, is the projects. You heard me talk about how that is the #1 impetus for this fund. That is where we want to spend the vast majority of the money of this fund. And I think we've written a pretty broad set of criteria such that it includes all green and gray infrastructure projects, stream stabilization, and public outreach. One last thing to say about that, though. We will use sliding cost share in this program. And at least thus far in our conversations, if there are other dedicated revenue sources that exist for the issue you'd like to resolve, for instance, if it's a road elevation issue and there is VDOT money or federal highway money, we'd like you to use that funding first and Community Flood Fund second. And to ensure that, you will probably see a larger cost share on the community side for a project that has other funding sources than you would for standalone projects. So clicking forward, after we talk about where it's going to get spent, people want to know, well, you know, how do you score it? Who's going to actually get it? So thus far, we've suggested a couple sort of award criteria. And those are as follows. Again, you heard me talk about the locality resilience plan. Each year we're going to publish a grant manual. So right now we have this guidance out. That's what we're talking about today. We're using that to sort of set our guide star, to set our course, but we will then further that every year with a grant manual with much more detail. So that's where we will have each year by year, we will be able to adjust cost shares. We will provide more detail on what satisfies the requirements for a local community plan, etc. You can also see in the coastal zone, we're going to use that master plan once it's developed to be the lead prioritizer of projects, if I can make that word. We will consider fiscal capacity, you know, when we do our grant awards. We have talked about minimum grant awards. We feel it's important to set a minimum grant award because we don't want to be flooded with very, very small dollar amounts. So right now we've tentatively set the thresholds, as you can see, $50K for projects, 25 for studies, 25 per plans. We are not capping projects at this time. If you have a multi-million-dollar project that one wanted to apply for, we will have to think about whether we fund something like that in tranches or, you know, a commitment with money as you go when you hit certain metrics. We haven't nailed that down yet. And again, last to recognize is that while I mentioned before a certain amount of revenue will come in every year, there's no requirement that all of the revenue that comes in be expended in any particular grant round. So Secretary and Admiral Phillips and others will have to determine how much money and when. Now, a few more details. We anticipate doing 2 grant rounds per year. You can see we'll do 1 grant round sort of the first half of the year, 1 in the second. Just a caveat that just because I wrote up there that we will have our first grant round in April, that does not necessarily mean the first grant round will be in this April. A lot of work to do before now and then. We may do a shortened grant round. We may skip a grant round. I just don't know yet. Eligible entities, as you can see, are going to be localities, PDCs on behalf of localities, but not necessarily for their own interests. Soil and water conservation districts, we believe, can be incredibly important for nature-based infrastructure, and tribal governments, of course, need to be included. As I said before, each year or before each grant round, we'll put out a manual, and that'll set sort of more details on the process. And then project selection will ultimately be informed by the Technical Advisory Committee, the Secretary, the Chief Resilience Officer, and Special Assistant for Coastal Adaptation. So I believe that is kind of the quickest overview I could do of some significant things I believe we've put in place and are hoping to see take shape in Virginia to really help us bolster our resilience. And as I mentioned before, what I told you today about the Community Preparedness Flood Fund is a formal proposal that the Commonwealth has made and put out for public comment. And you can see from this slide, there's a place that you can register public comments. We would love to hear from you. As you can see down at the bottom in particular, we'd love to hear from you about if we got right the allowable uses of grant funds, if there's things we should add or subtract. We want to talk a lot about, or we want to hear from you about what should be included in a local resilience plan. Any thoughts on grant timing that we might be missing, and grant awards minimums. We're happy to hear anything else. I'm happy to talk about all of that today, and I'd love to get some of your thoughts. I also just want to make the point that talking to me today does not necessarily count the same way formal written public comment would. So please, if you're interested, do both. It's really helpful for us to have things in writing that we can refer back to. So with that, I thank you for your time and your interest. I'm going to catch a breath for a second, and then let's have a conversation. I'd love to hear from you if you think we're on the right track and what we can do better. Thanks. I'm going to unshare my screen. Is that okay?
All right, thank you so much, Deputy Secretary Sachs. We've had some questions rolling in while you presented. Brian asked for clarification about what community scale means. How large of an area are you envisioning when you say community scale?
Hang on, I'm trying, I feel like I lost you guys. And am I still sharing my screen?
You are, so we can see your cool
Yes,
screensaver.
we can see the Porsche.
Background.
It's lovely.
I like cars, everybody. I'm sorry, I'm working on that glitch. So just give me, I apologize. I'm not the savviest computer dude.
Mm-hmm.
A little embarrassing.
We're good now.
All right. Thank you for bearing with me.
No problem. So that first question was from Brian, wondering what community scale meant and how large of an area you were envisioning when you referred to a community.
It's a great question. I don't know. I guess, whatever is tenable. So we know that, a kind of a patchwork of homes and things is not good. I've seen, situations where it's 4 homes sort of in a row, like kind of out in a place. I think I've seen situations in places like coastal Louisiana where they're looking at projects, that cover large swaths of land. So I think right now we are trying to encourage localities to go as big as they can within what's practical and pragmatic. And that's sort of as far as it goes right now. If you have more thoughts on how we should refine that or how we can do more to encourage it, we'd love to hear that.
All right. A couple folks also had a question about what a resilience plan is. Brian was wondering if a comprehensive plan could count for that, or Matt was asking if a regional hazard mitigation plan could count as a resilience plan. So maybe just clarification about what you view as a resilience plan.
I think, as I said, we're going to flesh that out in greater detail in upcoming grant manuals, and we haven't necessarily committed to what that is. Nonetheless, I think it's common sense that we want to be assured that a community, however that's structured, has looked at sort of the complete landscape, figured out their highest areas of risk, and taken steps to address that in a holistic way. It sounds to me like some of the plans you mentioned would do that. I have not necessarily read all of them. I know that, some of the resilience focused plans, I've seen some from the Hampton Roads area. We would certainly want them to. And I guess the last thing I'd say is we don't want to make busy work for people. So if you have a plan that you think checks the boxes that I was describing, just tell us. And we can go forward and even encapsulate those types of plans, in future iterations.
Okay. Brian had another question. He's been paying close attention to what you've been saying.
Where's Brian?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Brian, if you want to tell us in the chat or unmute and let us know what your affiliation is.
City of Portsmouth.
Brian.
Oh, great.
Cool. So he was asking, when you mentioned that projects will be prioritized by the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, if you meant that projects would specifically be listed in the plan, or if projects would just be evaluated using principles outlined in the plan.
Yeah, so a master plan, as far as I'm concerned, is a plan that actually says, here, go do that, and here, do that. And so it is project specific or antidote specific. And that is what we hope to accomplish for Virginia for the coastal zone, for those 4 kind of regions I showed on the map there. And yeah, that'll be an actual list of projects that we'll work in concert with localities and others to figure out what those ought to be. We'll talk to the Army Corps and others. And yeah, that for the coastal zone will trigger a large share of the Community Flood Fund expenditures.
Okay, thank you. Scott asked, and this might be a tough question for you to answer, but maybe it's come up in your discussions. He was wondering how this grant would align with DoD resilient grant funds that are available, particularly in the planning phase of projects, thinking about how to best, maximize the programs for the greatest benefit.
Yeah, it is a hard question, and not because I haven't thought about it, but just because I don't necessarily have a full sense of the universe of what's out there. So let me start with what I do know. If one wants to match a program like that, like REPI or something else, with Community Flood Preparedness Fund money, and we think it's a good project that would get Community Flood Preparedness money, we want that to happen. So for starters, we want to be able to match programs like that. That's one way we'll interface with them. 2, these locality plans, our Coastal Resilience Master Plan and things, if we want to incorporate those things into the plan as well, right? If we're going to have REPI do significant things at the edge of the fence lines of military bases, that's going to make a major impact on cities down in or areas in Hampton Roads, like we want to encapsulate that. So by building those things in the plan and having them there so then other people can see it, build atop of it, that's another way we'll foster collaboration. But if you think we need to do more, if you have better ideas, by all means. I hope everyone understands we're developing this as we go. We're building the plane as we fly, and that's why we may not have every answer, but we're going to figure it out.
Okay, that's a fair answer. And as you alluded to, there are a number of DoD grants available. So it would be interesting to see how some of those could be leveraged for this. Aaron was asking if we could restate the minimums and maximums. I assume that that is referring to the grant, which funds projects of 50,000, studies of 25,000, plans of 25,000, but I'm not entirely sure. So Aaron, you can type up if that was not what you were looking for.
So while we wait for that, I'll just share one other thing. That is correct, 50, 25, 25, no caps. One thing that I didn't explicitly mention is I have dabbled in this flood world for a while. I believe that planners, certified floodplain managers, et cetera, are really important for localities to have their own planners and to have that capacity. And so if there are communities who do not have that capacity, who need some funding for training, for certifying floodplain managers, et cetera, that's another thing we want to make available. We want to make grant funding available for you to do that.
Great. Elizabeth had a question about what the funds can be used for and if they could be used for land acquisition.
I would love that so much. That would be phenomenal. The secretary and governor really believe that we need to look at land use and protecting, preserving natural floodplains as a way to deal with this, especially in a state like Virginia, doesn't have the same kind of resources as Louisiana or others do. So yes, we want to do that. It's a great opportunity for me to mention that Governor Northam's Conserve Virginia, which is a technical model that helps identify high priority conservation lands. That's what Gina works on in her day job, among other things. Has a layer specifically devoted to flooding and floodplains. It buffers wetlands, wetland migration areas, and river and flooding zones with historical flooding. And if we could use money to purchase properties identified through Conserve Virginia, I think that would be phenomenal. Again, we're also really focused on all the other benefits we get from that, be it water quality, wildlife habitat, outdoor rec, et cetera. So 100%.
Awesome. Scott made just a comment. I don't know if he wanted to add anything more to it, if he wants to hop off mute. He was just saying that he works for OLDCC, which transparently, I do not know what that stands for, and that they stood up a resilience program last fiscal year, working in the Hampton Roads area, and just started working in Northern Virginia military installations.
Well, that's awesome.
So if he wants to hop mute and add anything, feel free to.
Yes, this is me. I think, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we'd definitely be interested in, so OEA, now we're Office of Local Defense and Community Cooperation, formerly Office of Economic Adjustment. We stood up a resilience program. We're working in Hampton Roads where we have grants already. We're also working with Quantico, Belvoir, and Joint Base Myers-Henderson Hall currently to develop a grant application. So I think we'd be very interested in talking further to try to figure out how we can marry up some efforts going towards the future. I think from my comment regarding the planning phase, I'm curious because when we have grants submitted versus or requests and applications, and when you have them submitted, how we could align efforts if we were looking to do a federal, then a match with your program in Virginia. Over.
Scott, Josh, can I answer that? This is Ann Phillips. So Scott, this is Ann Phillips. Please get in touch with me. Coordinating with OEA is what I do, and I'm pretty involved with the Office of Veterans and Defense Affairs, formerly Mike Coleman, now Tom Krabs. A big part of the TAC is involved in coordinating across federal partners and also coordinating to align financing opportunities across federal, state, and local. So please get in touch with me and we'll talk further and kind of coordinate you all into that process. Thank you.
Great. We had a few more questions about the grant and funding available. Julie was wondering if the funds will be broken down by a certain percentage for the different categories. So for the projects, studies, and plan categories, if you're planning on a certain allotment for those. And then she commented that perhaps allowing a large percentage for the planning portion of that might allow some of the smaller localities to catch up.
Yes, it's a great question. We have not made any final determinations. The governor has not made a final determination on how we will handle that yet. That said, I really think one can expect that each year's or each grant round's manual and update will change that focus some. And I think that in early rounds, whether by design or by default, you will see more of the study and planning grants go out because, finding shovel-ready projects is harder, and shovel-ready projects that have sort of passed through or been blessed by our master plan and things won't yet be in play. So I don't know exactly how that's going to happen to sort of push out those other types of grants first, but I think there's a likelihood that that will be the case. Does that answer your question a little bit? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Is that a telescope, Julie? You're on mute. Mm-hmm. Okay. Who's next?
All right, we had another question from Brian, wondering about how we plan to administer all of this money each year, wondering if you're going to be bulking up DEQ staff or staff elsewhere, and if other priorities will have to be de-emphasized in order to take on this task.
Great question. I'm glad you asked. No, we are hoping to add and not subtract. We want to keep going, and we don't anticipate any decline in other workload. And to that end, I'm happy to tell you that for the first time in what feels like a long time, there is a full complement of floodplain managers at DCR. And in Governor Northam's introduced budget going into this upcoming session, Governor Northam asked for 2 additional positions. We're also talking about some grant manager positions as well. So with all that, we think we will be able to staff up to support this fund. That might mean taking a small amount of money from the fund and using it on staff, but that would be a de minimis amount. But we are confident that we will have the staff resources to facilitate such a fund. And DCR, I'll also just say DCR is well practiced. This isn't the first time they're having to run, a major grant program or significant funding. Sorry, Julie.
On that note, I'm going to sneak one of my own questions in here and ask, what was the thought process in creating this new grant for people to take advantage of, knowing that DCR has a flood prevention and protection fund, and additionally there's the fund, the revolving loan fund that I'm having trouble remembering the name of, that was never, it was created by the General Assembly but never actually funded. So what was the thought process in creating something new versus investing in one of those?
Long story short, the thought process was we were going to use that fund you mentioned that was never capitalized. The name is escaping me right now. I bet Skip Stiles knows it. And as we realized we had this money, we had to channel it somewhere. Then we started to say, all right, well, let's make a couple of technical fixes and things to the existing program. And then it got to a point where we decided to just rename it as well. So we've essentially superseded that old program with the new one and this one, which has dedicated revenue. Other thing I'll just mention, since you got me talking about this, is, you know, I think we're the 13th state in Reggie now. I might be wrong on that. But a lot of states do Reggie, Northeast states, and a lot of states get revenue. Very few, if any, direct such a significant amount to coastal resilience. And that's really was because Governor Northam, Secretary Strickler, and the General Assembly prioritized it and said, we need to find a way to generate some of this money. So just credit where credit's due. We are handling Reggie slightly differently than some other states, and that's because the governor wanted to make this a priority.
Great. One other thing that I'll mention for folks who might not be aware, DCR's Flood Prevention and Protection Fund could be used to fund some of the same types of projects that can be funded under this new grant. But one major difference is that this grant, you can fund actual construction and implementation of physical projects with, which you cannot use DCR's fund for. DCR's fund is for planning and outreach and studies. So this could be a nice, next step if you've taken advantage of a DCR grant in the past. You can actually implement some stuff using this one.
And for whoever asked me about land conservation, you can also apply for a VLCF grant from DCR.
So true. All right, so we have some other questions about funding. John was wondering, since there's no max limit on funding for a project, if there's going to be any guidelines in place to make sure that the funds are spread out across numerous projects or spread out across the state instead of the majority of it or a big chunk of it just going to one project or one locality.
I don't know right now of any sort of legal provisions that would require that, but I can tell you from having many conversations with Secretary Strickler and Admiral Phillips, that if we had one project that was going to gobble up a majority of the funding, that would have to show incredible statewide significance. That would have to be a choice they make, and I think the requirements to prove efficacy would be high.
On a related note, Aaron was wondering if they'll have to prove the cost effectiveness of a project by providing a business case analysis or some sort of documentation or quantification for the benefits of the proposed project.
I don't know yet. I think as we develop the grant manual, we'll have to see, if we ask people for alternatives considerations or other things like that. Not something we've spent a lot of time talking about. Don't have a strong sense of it yet. Be happy to take comments from you in writing, and if you had an idea of which way you wanted it to go.
All right. Brian had a question. He said, between the fund and the plan, there have been references to various oversight and technical committees, including a board that sounds like the Commonwealth Transportation Board and a committee made up of PDC directors. Have other options been considered? PDCs don't really do implementation, and the CTB opens up the fund to being administered and appointed by people who don't believe in climate change. So, is that the direction of things, and are there other options? Okay,
you got me a little confused on that one. I'm not gonna lie. So let me say what I know, and then Gina, help me kind of unpack all this. So okay. CTB not involved at all here. I don't know if that was assumed or not, but if the CTB is not involved. The Technical Advisory Committee, which was established the end of last year by Governor Northam by executive order, is a group of technical and local experts. It includes PDC directors. It includes academics and people from our science institutions and others. And that group as its name implies, is an advisory committee to advise the Secretary and Admiral Phillips as they make decisions. Under the constraints that the Secretary and Admiral Phillips give them. We'd like you to present to us on this thing. We're going to create a work group. We're going to do that. So not sure exactly, having said those things, Gina, help me understand the question a little better and what I'm missing.
I think that's probably answered it some. I think there was an assumption that the CTB was involved and maybe missed that the technical advisory committee was made up of more than just PDCs. But Brian, if you want to hop off mute and ask any follow-up questions on that, you are welcome to do so.
So I know that the CTB is not involved. What I said in the question was, it sounded like in the plan it referenced a board that sounded like the Commonwealth Transportation Board would be appointed to oversee. I'm not sure if it would be the fund or the plan or both. But it made me concerned that this opens the funding or at least the planning up to significant political influence from people that potentially don't believe in things like climate change, and then this whole thing becomes a moot point. And so I was just kind of wondering how that oversight was going to work if you all were planning on creating some sort of board that would be appointed by the governor to oversee some aspect of this, or if it would just strictly be the technical committee like you described, who would be reporting to Ann and to the secretary.
Yeah, so we have no intention of creating another board at this point. And in terms of like determination, so where the flood fund money goes, at the end of the day, the grant awards are going to be determined by the secretary, and his team, using the scoring criteria we put forward and things. But we will not be opening that decision making up to people who don't agree with us on, that's the secretary's prerogative, and he's going to make those decisions. He believes in climate change.
All right. Well, folks, keep the questions and comments and ideas coming in the chat box. While we wait for a couple more to come in, I can ask a question or two. So you mentioned that one of the first phases of this is you put out an RFP for an engineering firm to help. Do you know when the selected firm will be announced?
So I'll answer that one, Gina. So the RFP was released 1 December. It closed December 30th. We have just started the review of the received proposals. So they're being reviewed by the contracting official now, and there is a board already put together to be a part of the review process. And once they have cleared contracts, we will begin. The board includes representatives from cities who have done this kind of work already, planning districts, and I should state, to be clear, this RFP is for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan process. This is not for the Virginia Community Flood Preparedness Fund, although they are related, as we've discussed at length already. So back to the board, includes representatives from cities who have done this work, planning districts who have done this work, and academia, as well as the Office of the Governor. So that's in progress, and we hope to be through that process within the next 30 to 45 days, barring any unforeseen circumstances.
Great, thank you so much for that update. Another question about requiring a benefit cost analysis, and if that will be using the FEMA tool for that, or if there's going to be a similar methodology laid out. I don't know if y'all have gotten into the weeds on that yet, but that is a question that Dipmani had.
I don't know. No, we have not. I don't have a good answer for you. But I'm glad this is coming up, because this is, I don't know, my fourth or fifth one of these types of calls, and this is the first time people have really been raising this issue. So it's interesting to see this bubble up, and we'll have to figure it out.
Okay, and so I guess related to that, and the ability that interested parties have to provide comments and feedback, Brian was noticing that so far it seems like documents have been put out for feedback, but he's wondering if there'll be an opportunity for any more proactive engagement where they can share ideas maybe before document drafting occurs, or earlier in the process, I think.
Well, we have an open door in the Northam Administration, and we do our best to telegraph things like this are happening. Obviously, like the flood fund, there was a bill in the General Assembly, there was a bill signing, there are press releases, and if ever people see something that they're interested in, that they want to talk to us about, share thoughts about, our door is always open. We're happy to take meetings, phone calls, sit with you, read an email, whatever you want. It's sort of hard sometimes to figure out when you first go out to the public, and you can't go out and say simply like, I kind of have an idea, you need to put something on paper. So, kind of working through those aspects, but if you feel like you want to talk to us before something hits and you're nervous that might happen, feel free to just reach out.
All right, thank you. I've got a question in mind that maybe you could answer. So the grant is available for localities and PDCs. Is there an opportunity for private firms or other organizations to partner with localities and PDCs to apply for the grant, or would it just be limited to government agencies?
Question. I think, what we're trying to get to at the end of the day is to fund project studies and planning that the locality and the state think are of significance. If a locality is working with a company or something on something that meets those criteria anyway, I don't see why we couldn't, sort of whose name goes on the application. I'm not sure how much that matters. Obviously a lot of these funds are going to require you to hire contractors or construction people or others to do them. So I don't have a problem with that, with the caveat that it needs to satisfy the requirements of helping the community and reducing flooding first and foremost.
That makes sense. Oh, okay, so this is a good question. Antonella is a grad student at George Washington University working at the Appalachian Regional Commission as a program assistant. She noted that 25% of the money has been allocated for projects in low-income geographic areas, and is wondering what strategy will be used to engage low-income communities in these discussions. I'm wondering how low-income communities will be defined or identified. And she's also asking about the sliding scale that you mentioned could be used for the grant match.
All right. Can
so
you
kind of
give it to me
unpacking low-income community as it is laid out in general.
So, all right. One, engaging with low-income communities to help them with their flood preparedness, their NFIP status, community rating system, all that sort of stuff is always a challenge. And again, you heard me earlier mention the two recently hired people at DCR, one of whom is going to be focused on CRS, and one is going to be focused on compliance. So those jobs are sort of, in essence, about outreach to these communities and working with them. We're going to continue to do events like this and reach out to them. If you want I won't pretend that I give a particularly fun presentation, but if you'd like me or my colleagues to come talk to a particular group, even if it's 5 people, the only way to do it is just by keep on talking to people. So if you send us somewhere, if someone needs to be spoken to, if they want to talk to us, we're going to go there. Creating this need for the local resilience plan, we think that's another way to bring groups to the table. We see entities like Wetlands Watch who want to go outreach to communities like that and help them and provide assistance. All of these things, none of them is a silver bullet, but they all help move us forward in that regard. So I think I answered part of the question. Did I miss something?
I think that sort of got to the engagement piece.
Cost share.
I don't know if you have any more information on the sliding scale or how those communities will be identified.
They are identified using a metric defined in code. And I unfortunately don't recall that off the top of my head, but it's not as if, we're using an eye test, we're using a standard metric. Then we can circle back on that, Anne. I don't think that the other part is the sliding cost share is simply, I think the best way to explain a cost share is this. We want to encourage the things that we think are best, and we're going to do that by giving them a lesser cost share. We also, you heard me talk about wanting to ensure no community is left behind and every community is able to improve their resilience. And that's going to just require a more generous cost share for certain communities. So that's what I can say at the macro. And in the micro, we're talking about a lot of money. We're talking about a fairly decent sized state and a lot of projects and things. And we're going to have to sort of see what's coming in, what gets funded in a particular grant round, what's kind of left outstanding. And we're going to, turn the dials, I'd imagine, each grant round until we kind of perfect it. And even once we perfect it, we might find, all right, now we're doing great at a certain type of thing, but we need a greater emphasis on another thing. And that's what those sliders are going to enable us to do. So again, a sort of partial answer, but that's as far as we've thought it through so far.
Okay, thank you. Kristen had a comment sort of relating back to the opportunity to give feedback. She was noting that DCR grant manuals are considered guidance documents. And if the grant manual for this grant is also considered a guidance document, it will require a 30-day public comment period, which would provide an opportunity for localities and other interested parties to give feedback, if that's the way that you all are interpreting it as a guidance document. And in addition to that, she's wondering if you considered a longer comment period since this is a brand new program.
I don't know that we are viewing it as that. I can certainly think of other examples like the Land Conservation Foundation grants, where I don't believe it's construed as guidance and we don't need to do a public comment. So I'll have to take a pass on that and review the code, talk to our attorneys and things, and go from there.
Okay. Demetra had a question about whether or not green infrastructure is a mandatory element of projects to be funded through this grant, or whether they're just maybe emphasized or recommended. She's noting that particularly in dense urban areas, they, consider green infrastructure part of their toolkit, but it's hard to implement across the board in those more urban areas.
Yeah, there are going to be situations where gray or hardened infrastructure is necessary, and we want to fund that. I think that where you'll probably see, in a project like that, let's say, a flood wall that does not have a green component, so to speak, if the question is, could that still be funded? The answer is absolutely. If there's a place for us to prioritize the kind of green infrastructure stuff or encourage it more, I think it would be something more like the locality resilience plan should have, a minimum amount of green infrastructure or nature-based solutions, I think is the better way to say it. Be that land conservation, zoning, natural berms, earth and levees, whatever. But then, once you have a community plan, what projects you actually apply for when is up to you.
Okay, great. So the short answer is there's flexibility and it's not limited to just green infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Should I have just said yes?
No, I liked your more elaborate answer. Just wanted to make sure we were on the same page.
Okay.
All right. Let me see. So while folks continue to come up with some questions and comments, I had a question or two about the coastal master plan, which I'm not sure if you're to the point where these things will be answered or if it's still too early in the works. But I was wondering how the coastal master plan would impact localities and if local governments would be expected to adopt plans or policies or regulations as a result of that coastal master plan.
The question is, will localities have to adopt plans, regulations, et cetera, to facilitate the coastal?
Yeah, so it's coastal master plan only going to be, I guess, carried out on the state level, or will the action items in that be passed down to the local level too, where the state plan might identify certain things that you want all of the localities in that region to do, and then they would have to adopt that policy as well.
I'm not sure. I think we can ask Admiral Phillips if she wants to weigh in, but I think that if it was like I guess what popped into my head is well, if it was a policy we wanted, like, why wouldn't we establish that through our normal policy mechanisms? I think the master planning framework, there are elements to it that say we want to incorporate, good governance, good planning. We've adopted a freeboard standard for the Commonwealth. We'd love it if localities adopted them. We've adopted sea level rise projections. We'd love it if people adopted things like that. But I'm not aware at this point of any impetus to sort of require something. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's what I know.
Okay.
I don't know if Anne has anything to add. Maybe it looks like she might have dropped off.
I was also wondering when y'all are expecting the coastal master plan to be completed.
Our hope is that it can be completed before the end of Governor Northam's administration. So, around this time next year. That's what I know.
Perfect. Good goal.
So it seems like we've maybe exhausted the questions, Gina. Is that where we are?
I think that is the case. Nothing else is popping in right now, unless anyone has any last minute comments or questions they want. Folks have been chatting some about the definition of low income community and sharing some environmental justice screening tools. So that's been going on in the chat, which I think is helpful. So I'll be pulling some of that later to look at for sure.
Great. It's hard to read the chat while we're doing this, but those who have facilitated this have done a great job, and we get readouts of everything that's happening in the chats. We do read it all and think about it. So thank you for that. So is it time to maybe wrap it up and bring us home, Gina? We good to go?
Yeah, if there's no other outstanding questions.
So I would like to just thank all of you for joining us and for asking questions, for sharing some thoughts and helping us continue to think about this. I want to encourage you, if you are interested, if you've heard something that's either really good or really bad, and you want to let us know, be it through formal public comment, setting up a meeting or a call with me, or reaching out to one of my colleagues. But please, if you want to stay engaged in this, by all means, we want you to stay engaged. So let's find ways to keep talking, offline. And with that, I just want to thank Gina and Wetlands Watch again. And I don't know if our friends at Wetlands Watch need to say anything else, but thank you all for everything you do and for all your help.
And thank you, Deputy Secretary. Super appreciated you being here today and sharing all of this good information. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure other folks did. And very appreciative of the folks at Wetlands Watch who got this all set up for us.
All right, well, thank you. Happy New Year.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Josh.